To be clear, this is a really stupid video. Most people already know all of the compounds that I'm going to list off. I mean, take a wild guess what number one is. However, I still think this is a video that needs to be made because maybe by explaining the reasons why people take some of these very dangerous yet legal compounds, it'll deter away some of those rebels from ever trying it. They'll be like, oh, everybody tries these? Because everybody tries them, I'm going to avoid them. No, I'm just going to go straight for the even more dangerous ones. No, let's hope that they don't think that. I'd also like to make it clear that I do not condone the use of any of these compounds. Some of them are very dangerous, and I don't believe that anyone need try them. However, in our Western world, most people will try at least one or two substances from this list. Many will try all five, and I'd also like to point out that a lot of you guys are still using at least one or two of these on a daily basis, and a lot of you guys don't even consider some of these drugs. That's how twisted social perception has become on some of these, again, very dangerous compounds that I don't think should be as prevalent in our world as they are. Anyway, let's get right down into this list.
According to YouTube guidelines shown here, videos which intend to educate are documentary by nature and do not glorify the use of drugs. Both abide by the community safety guidelines and are eligible for monetization. The following video does not glorify the use of drugs, instead it attempts to be non-biased while delivering vital life-saving information disguised as entertainment.
On number one, we have, no shocker to anybody, but alcohol. Why do people drink? There are so many reasons, from social anxiety to social pressure to the fact that it's shoved in our faces. I recently quit alcohol, and just you saying the word alcohol will now make ads on YouTube show up for beer commercials. How twisted is that? You would think that alcohol, being a drug, would not be allowed to be shoved in people's faces and glamorized, but it's glamorized in music and movies, and it really does offer a slight boost of euphoria. But most people who drink regularly will notice that there is a certain point they get to where the euphoria peak drops off and it no longer feels good. This is when you enter blackout territory, and at that point, it's almost like it has some dysphoria attached to it. So I want to highlight that to showcase that this excessive getting blackout shit-faced culture that most teenagers find themselves in is stupid. You're more likely to make stupid decisions because your inhibitions are blocked off. Another huge reason why people drink, because in our society, there are many things that are still very taboo. A lot of young people aren't taught, just about simple things like sex etiquette properly, and they have no confidence. And at least speaking for myself, I would drink alcohol because it made me feel more comfortable and confident in bed. Most people can't admit that. Again, there are so many reasons why people drink, and I would hardly say pressure is the biggest one. A lot of people see it as an easy way to reduce anxiety, because how many movies are out there where as soon as something bad happens, pops off is the bottle of wine for women, or for guys, they're shown reaching for a beer. Or if there's a really difficult conversation to be had by professionals, the guy's got a glass of whiskey. It is shoved in our faces at every corner, and most people don't even realize that alcohol is a drug. Alcohol is actually one of the most dangerous drugs in our society. If you just think about it for a second, you would see that because it's so readily available, it is so easily abused. You can actually die from the withdrawals. That means if you're a heavy user and you just cold turkey off, you have a chance of dying. There are only a handful of other compounds that have these same crazy debilitating effects when you try to get clean. I mean, you want to talk about the dangers? Cirrhosis of the liver. If you're a gym buff like me, it's going to destroy your gains. Increased rates of obesity. Destroys families. In fact, in most murders, the person is likely to be drunk. It induces states of violence. It is not what you would want in the number one spot for the main compound of choice for a society. It's probably what you would want way at the bottom, yet here we are, still living like archaic idiots, drinking ourselves stupid and hurting each other. Well, before we jump on to the next compound, I do need to take a minute to say thank you to this video's sponsor. This video has been graciously sponsored by Surfshark. They are a VPN provider. What this does is keep you protected. So when you're watching these very taboo videos about all of these things that you should not be doing, especially if you're, I want to say someone who's underage, but I want to say anybody, because nobody should be taking these things, especially not every day, then you want to make sure you're protected, because your internet provider can actually peek in and see everything you are freaking doing, looking up other taboo things. I mean, I don't know what you freaking do in your spare time, but I do know that being protected under the veil of a VPN helps keep your privacy in your own hands, so at least you don't feel like you're being watched all the time. I mean, I want to say sucks, but I'm making videos, so I am watched all the time. Also, another bonus that I always talk about because I use it myself is if you're using something like, say, Netflix or Hulu, you can change your location, which gives you a whole new array of new videos to watch. I love this. More movies, the better. Anyway, click the link in my video description, use the code PSYCHED, and get a very alluring 83% off and an extra 3 months for free. This is the best price for a VPN on the freaking market, guys. You guys are getting a crazy killer deal, so huge thank you to Surfshark. And if you don't have a VPN, I highly suggest you sign up because it also helps the channel, because the more of you guys that sign up, the more likely they are to sponsor future videos. Anyway, let's get back to today's scheduled programming. On to number 2, we've got cigarettes. Sometimes this goes hand in hand with alcohol. A lot of people start smoking because they were offered one when they were drunk, when their inhibitions were lower, and they're like, yeah. Also, people start smoking because of being a teenager. This, I feel like, might be more to my age group, because these days vaping nicotine is the new big thing. It's funny how nicotine is the constant. It's arguable whether vaping is safer. On some levels it is, but there have been cases of people actually dying from vaping because the liquid that they were using was not good for them, and it actually coated their lungs and they stopped breathing. Like, there's some scary shit that has happened. Vaping is not necessarily 100% safe, but smoking cigarettes is definitely dangerous. We all know this. And people smoke for, again, a variety of reasons. Nicotine will actually release more dopamine in the brain. This is why people often pair smoking with coffee. Coffee releases a bit of dopamine, and then the nicotine releases dopamine, so the two in tandem get you more straight up high. I really don't think I have to list off the dangers of smoking. In Canada, where I live, they're actually plastered right on the packs themselves. I mean, we got lung cancer, heart disease, we got fertility and pregnancy problems, menstrual issues, erectile problems, coughing, shortness of breath, fatigue, decreased energy, bad breath. Yeah, you know, that's the worst one on that list. That bad breath will really fucking get you. On to number 3. The next one that most people will try, and a lot of people are still using, is none other than weed. The first time I was personally introduced to it was on That 70s Show. I loved that show as a kid, and I always remember those scenes where the camera would pan around the circle and they were all just sharing their shit together. I would definitely say That 70s Show influenced me to wanting to try it. Now, I would say out of the 3 I've mentioned so far, cannabis has the least dangers attached to it. There are some, don't get me wrong, especially depending on how you consume it, but assume you're vaporizing, which is way safer than burning it up and smoking it, less carcinogenic, or even eating it, then the physical implications are less. But these days, what we're finding is a lot of people are having serious mental and then actual physical addiction symptoms because they're smoking so much. People are using it as a way to just escape parts of their life that they don't enjoy, and they're also using it as something to heighten everyday life at every corner, meaning they're no longer really experiencing pleasure on their own. It's always pleasure with the addition of an external stimuli, in turn makes you dependent on that exogenous compound for your good feelings, and I don't think I have to explain why that is bad. Wreak havoc on your level of confidence. Just feeling dependent on something can make you feel like you are not good enough just as you are. And of course, cannabis for some is extremely paranoia-inducing. I would say most of the harm attached to cannabis use comes from overuse. If you're just going to use it occasionally, then generally it is probably much safer than the other substances on this list. But still, too much of anything is not a good thing unless you're some kind of a freak. There are some people out there who remain totally productive, cognitive control of their life, and they smoke weed all the time. But I would say these are the outliers. It's not the norm. And number 4, this one is going to be none other than good old coffee, or we could just say caffeine, so we could include tea in this list. Let's ask Google what percent of people drink coffee. Around 150 million Americans consume coffee. That amounts to approximately 50% of the US population. Furthermore, 85% of American coffee drinkers have at least 1 cup of coffee at home. I hate how I type it in and it gives me the states as if that's like the universal norm for everywhere. I live in Canada. I don't live in the States. But let's just go with that number. That's easy enough. 50%. So this is probably one of the most, up there with alcohol, commonly used substances, and it's the most commonly abused compounds because people don't actually realize that it has real pharmacological effects. I mean, why do people drink coffee? This is pretty obvious. It boosts their productivity, increases levels of alertness. They feel more awake. It's a pick-me-up. And this largely has to do with its reaction on the dopamine receptors in the brain. It also works as an adenosine blocker. Adenosine is basically what makes you tired, simply put. And caffeine comes in and it blocks off the receptor from accepting adenosine, meaning you're not going to be as tired. But here's the thing. All of that adenosine actually piles up, especially if you're drinking lots of coffees. And then when the caffeine leaves your system, you can have a surplus of it, making people subsequently crash and get more tired. Now, this all depends on your individual sensitivity. For me, I will crash if I have, say, multiple coffees in a row, but I find if I just have one coffee, once every few days, I don't have these negative effects. These negative effects such as the intense crashes where you have no energy and you feel like you need the coffee to keep going, these are heightened as your addiction heightens. So I would say a lot of people who rely on coffee as the first thing they have in the morning, they're probably in this criteria where they get to the point where they have to drink multiple coffees. As with most substances, your addiction tends to just go up and up, meaning you constantly need more and more to get the same effects that one used to give you. I invite anyone watching this to take, I would say, 2 weeks to a month off coffee. And first of all, watch how you feel. A lot of people are going to actually have nasty withdrawals to the point where they won't be able to do it. Like they're going to be really irritable. They're going to feel like they have no energy, obviously, to do anything, and feel super tired. And all of their thoughts are going to obsess on, if I could only have a coffee, I would feel so much better. It is an actual drug. And here's the kicker. After, say, a month off, try just one coffee, and you are going to actually feel the effects for what they are. I did this myself. I took multiple months off and then had a coffee, and I was like, oh my God, I am so stimulated. It actually felt like a light version of, say, my ADHD medication that I used to take. Suffice to say, the effects were much more intense than I anticipated. A lot of people, it has now become their normal. It's normal for them to be caffeinated, and they don't really remember what it felt like when it wasn't their normal. They don't realize the actual pharmacological effects that it's having on their body. I don't think it's healthy to be dependent, especially when it changes your brain chemistry. And if you are taking a substance every day, it does alter your neurochemistry to the point where you do become dependent on it, which is what causes the withdrawals. The withdrawals are your brain going, oh my gosh, now we are at a lesser state than we normally are, just to make it super simple. And your brain's always trying to reach a state of homeostasis. So now it takes your brain time to regulate its own neurotransmitters again to get back to that normal, which the coffee that you were taking every day lowered your state of normal. And that's why the effects largely feel lessened to you, because now the coffee does, in a sense, become your normal. Of course, you're still getting a little heightened, but it's nowhere near, say, the dopaminergic effect that you got when you first tried it from a clean slate. I would say, personally speaking, the biggest negative effect for coffee for me was the sleep disturbances, especially if you're having multiple a day. Again, this isn't that bad if you're only having one in the morning, because then by the time you get to sleep, it's largely worn off. But if you're having multiple a day, even if you're not feeling it in the evening, it can cause you to wake up in the middle of the night. It disrupts the sleep cycle. And I would say that the best natural booster you can get to actually feeling your best is a good quality night's rest. And just the fact that coffee disrupts this makes it, in my opinion, not worth taking, especially not every day. You know, maybe at the most once every other day, but you want to avoid taking anything every day because that is how you become dependent on it. Now, before we continue, I must showcase our new item. This is the brand new, you guys have been asking for it, Trip Suit. We have limited stock available. I think there's less than 300. If you do want to trip in comfort and, dare I say, style, head on over to psychsubstance.shop and you can get this new onesie. And let's continue on with our regular programming. And number 5, this is the hardest one for me to actually state honestly, because this one really depends on age. I would say these days, number 5 for a lot of young people is going to be synthetic cannabinoids, just because they're legal and they're readily available. But for me, back in the day, this would have been salvia. You could actually buy salvia at places like Rock Universe. You could go into convenience stores, gas stations, and they sold it. It was a legal substance, and a lot of people saw it as like an alternative to cannabis, even though the effects are totally different. It's way more intense, especially because you would get these extracts anywhere from like a 10x to like a 40 or more, meaning it was crazy intense and it would scare the pants off a lot of people. But these days also, kratom could be the number 5 most commonly used substance. It's rising in popularity. They sell it in the States at gas stations, convenience stores, head shops, obviously. And I don't think I need to get into the dangers of kratom. If you know my channel, I used to be addicted to kratom, also known as kratom. And this actually has an effect on the opioid receptors in your brain. And it kind of works like a light version of a more, say, serious opioid. It also has other alkaloids in it, giving it a more array of different psychological effects. But the dangers really outweigh the positives, especially extreme dependence. As with synthetic cannabinoids, we don't have any long-term data on how safe they are, and some of the ones that have come out have actually been proven to increase people's rates of, say, schizophrenia, inducing states of long-term psychosis, drug-induced psychosis, severe addiction to the point where people have been shaking until they get their fix. Like, the synthetic cannabinoids is not stuff that you want to mess with. Salvia, there's really no negative health implications of salvia use, but there was an era on YouTube when there was so many videos of people filming themselves taking it and just like being completely debilitated. They could barely speak. They would sometimes flail about on the ground. Rarely they would smile and laugh. Often they would just freak the F out. And it probably damaged them psychologically in the long term, maybe even gave some people PTSD depending on how intense the experience was. It is a very intense psychoactive compound that should never have been readily available, but a lot of people in my age range have tried it just because you could buy it everywhere, and at the time in Canada, cannabis wasn't legal, so it was like the only legal thing you could get, especially if you were a kid, was salvia. Isn't that crazy? One of the most intense ones you could just buy at the store. Anyway, that about wraps up this video. There are many more pros, cons, dangers, health risks with all the substances I've listed. I'm just trying to keep it short by listing the top ones that pop into my head to show you guys why you probably should avoid at least habitual use of all of these things. I don't even care if it's coffee. Anything when it's taken every single day, I think is going to have more negatives for you in the long run than positives. Anyway, take from this video what you will. I hope you all enjoyed it. If you liked this video, make sure you smash that like button, leave a comment for the algorithm, and let me know what types of videos you would like to see next. And yeah, subscribe to the channel. Less than 50% of you guys watching aren't subscribed. It just takes a second. Click that subscribe button. It tells me that you want to see more like this, and I'm going to see all you guys in the next one. Cheers.